I have learned that the ideas that pop into your head, even when you're trying not to think about them, that just resurface on their own, are, are often the ideas that will turn into an actual book.
Hi there, I am Javacia Harris-Bowser, founder of C. Wright, and I'm also the curator of the Reckon Women Voices column. Through that column, we bring you essays every week from Southern women, and now we have something even more special for you. We have put together some interviews with Southern women writers, and we hope that as you get to know these women and get to know more about their work and their writing process, that it will inspire you to do some writing of your own. In today's interview, we are going to be chatting with Jen Phillips. She is an award-winning author of 5 novels. Her debut novel, The Well and the Mine, was the winner of the Barnes & Noble Discover Award. And since then, her work has been sold in 29 countries. Jen was born in Montgomery, Alabama, but she's worked as a magazine writer for more than a decade, living in Ireland, New York, Washington, D.C. Eventually, she made her way back to Alabama, and she currently lives in Birmingham with her family. And we are so glad that she is back here in the South, and I am so happy that she is here to chat with me today. Hi, Jen. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Javacia, thanks for having me.
So first off, I do need to have a bit of a fangirl moment because The Well and the Mine is one of my favorite books ever.
Oh, thank you.
You are welcome. It's true. I'm not just saying that because we're on this interview. It really is. And for those of you watching, if you haven't read this book, you need to get your life together. But in case you haven't read it, let me tell you a little bit about it. So this book is set in 1931 in a small Alabama coal mining town. And it follows a 9-year-old girl named Tess Moore. And she sees this woman that she doesn't know toss a baby in a well. And she goes basically on this mission to unravel this mystery and figure out what all of this is. Now, this book, y'all, is so good. And some reviewers even compare it to Kill a Mockingbird. So despite that comparison,
don't ever say that. It's super.
I know you get weird when people say that, but it's true. Some reviewers have compared it to Kill a Mockingbird. Now, despite that comparison, Jen, I know that you said that when you wrote this book, you didn't set out to write Southern fiction. So tell me, what was the inspiration for that book?
I think some of that is just the idea that I think very few writers probably set out with a label for their book. The label sort of what that is gets attached later. For me, a story often starts with an image, maybe a what if scenario. And for me, with the Well and the Mine, a couple of things happen around the same time. I like the idea of a little girl sitting out on a porch, looking out at the night and seeing something that changed the way she saw this town that she'd known her whole life. I'd also weirdly been thinking about setting a book in Pennsylvania because I'd read a book about the anthracite coal mine strikes in the early 1900s, as we do, and had been really struck by the coal miners' letters and the way they spoke, and particularly in the ways that they were really more integrated racially than most workforces, and that meant they had a really different view about race. A lot of the miners really knew long before most of white society at least, that class was the real issue, that if Black and white workers would join together against sort of management, that a lot more could be done. So, and it took me a very long time to realize, actually, what if I set that in Alabama? What if I set it in Walker County, where my grandmother and her siblings grew up? My great aunt right now still lives in the house that my great grandfather, a coal miner, built. I knew the area really well, although I grew up in Montgomery. And it sort of opened up this. The other thing was at that time in 1931, coal mining was the only integrated workforce in Alabama. And I liked what that might be able to do with the story. So as often happens, the characters came, the notion of this tight-knit family, this world that they lived in, this sort of, I love the idea from the beginning of this sort of back-breaking work. And although they are not impoverished, they are always right on the line of having enough. I
Mhm.
like the idea of sort of the beauty of life filtered through this really hard day-to-day living. So all those things sort of came together, and it wound up, yes, it was a Southern book, and I think I was a little. It's taken me a while to get comfortable, or even to think through my reaction to the idea of it being a Southern book and being
Mhm.
a Southern writer.
I want to talk about one of your more recent works, and that is Fierce Kingdom. I love that book as well. Again, I'm fangirling here. So, if you haven't read it, this novel, it follows a woman who is trying to protect her son when basically there's a shooting in a zoo. And it's a book that I really want to be adapted into a movie. So, someone who's watching this, make that happen. But tell me, how did you get the idea for that book that's so different from The Well and the Mine?
The idea in the first place came from an afternoon at the zoo, at the Birmingham Zoo. My son and I, at the time, who when I started writing this was for, and we were in the zoo a lot, and you have a lot of time to think when you are staring at the same animal for the 3,000th time. And at some point, probably because of something in the news, it occurred to me, I should say, because of the sort of things that are all too common in the news now, it occurred to me, what would we do if somebody came in here with a gun right now? I could carry him. And actually, I know this place pretty well. I know this place like way too well. And where would we go? Where would it like it'd be kind of it'd be there's a lot of space to hide. Now, I can tend to do that sometimes, like on vacation, if I think about potential zombie attack, like how we would board up the doors. So it did not immediately strike me that those were the thoughts that would lead to an actual novel. It just seems sort of a dark daydream. But it kept coming back to me over the next few days, and eventually, after about a week went by, I have learned that the ideas that pop into your head, even when you're trying not to think about them, that just resurface on their own, are are often the ideas that will turn into an actual book. So I sat down and just started writing to see what came out, and started to realize I knew I had wanted to write about motherhood and really what that meant. And it just started to occur to me, maybe this is a way to do that when through a really intense lens in a really specific place, and like, how would that work if I wanted to explore motherhood over the course of like 3 real-time hours?
Mhm.
It's the sort of thing you don't know. It's equally possible that you write 10 pages and you throw them away and it's all crap. And then sometimes the idea comes, and you can tell pretty soon, like this one's, I'm going to stick with this one and see it all the way through. So it's fun. It was also a way that sort of preserved my child at 4,
Mhm.
forever in the pages of the book. So despite the fact that they're sort of psychopaths and bullets flying, to me, it's a really joyful book because it's still ultimately about my child.
So one of the reasons we're doing these videos is that we're hoping that we can encourage people to do some writing of their own. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your writing process. So when you write, you sort of said earlier that you kind of just get an idea and then you just start writing. So at what point, or do you ever create an outline for your plot or anything like that, or do you just write it all and then go back and do all of that? What's your process like?
It's sort of somewhere in between. I certainly don't outline in great detail, but I think everyone falls somewhere on a spectrum of just completely winging it, or doing a very multi-page comprehensive outline where each chapter from beginning to end. I would never outline the whole book. For me, a couple of things. One is it's more fun when you don't know exactly where it's headed. I actually, for Fierce Kingdom, happened to know where I wanted it to end almost from the first page. But there was everything in the middle I didn't know. But those discoveries are part of the fun. And I also think, for me, you get to know your characters. You get to know the world they live in as you move through the story. And so until you know them, until you let them start to take some steps for themselves and surprise you, it's very hard to know where that ending is headed. Now, that said, I think I also want some structure. So for me, I usually write maybe 5, 10, maybe 20 pages. I get some feel for whether what I think I'm doing is working. And I try to give the characters a little room to breathe and come to life. And then I always do an outline, at least for the first half of the book. And usually I'll do the first half or so by outline. And it may be 1 page total. It may have like 3 lines for each chapter of just, this is what I want to happen. And I write chronologically, linearly. I skip around a bit. If I'm stuck on chapter 1, then I may move on to chapter 2. I may have one scene in chapter 1 go in at the same time as 1 and 3 and 4, but I don't skip ahead to chapter 10 when I've been working on chapter 2. But all that, yeah, there's always some room to wiggle, some room for surprises to happen. And often those are both the most fun parts to write and the most successful parts of the book, because something organic did happen.
So are you a writer who writes every day? Do you write at a certain time of day?
I do. I mean, now for the last 10, 11 years, it's been my full-time job. So I treat it like a full-time job. I get up in the morning, I get dressed, there's no pajamas. I feel like that's one of the first lessons you learn if you work from home. Don't wear pajamas. I realize plenty of people do. For me, that doesn't work. Don't turn the TV on. But yeah, get dressed, sit down, and I work a pretty normal, regular, grown-up day, and then go pick up my child from school. What may be helpful to more readers is that before that, when I had a normal job that actually paid money and I was writing on the side, I still wrote every day. And then I was, if anything, more regimented about writing, that I would always make myself sit down somewhere between 9:30 and 10 and write for at least 30 minutes, no matter how I felt, no matter how crappy it felt like the work was going. And I mean, 90% of the time I would then find that after 30 minutes, I'd fallen into the story enough that I would keep going. But yeah, I mean, I think that is one major mark of whether you will make it as a writer or not. Do you sit down and write? And do you do it regularly and with discipline? Because it's not like inspiration fairies are flying around and dropping entire books into your head. There is no other profession where people would think, I don't actually have to work. I just have to wait and some magic happens. And then poof, there is a finished product that will support me and my family for like many years to come. It's still work. It's still discipline. And the first draft is nothing like the final draft. There is absolutely some inspiration, and that's a beautiful thing.
Those are things that I preach all the time. This idea that like you can't sit around and wait for inspiration to just hit you, and that you do have to write every day, even if you feel like the writing is crappy. You just got to get that crappy first draft out there and then
make it better.
Going. Yeah. So you mentioned that you do write full time now, and I know that this happened after The Well in the Mind was such a success. And I feel like for a lot of writers, that's the goal, to be able to live the life that you're living right now. What kind of advice would you give to someone who is dreaming of being able to do that one day?
Like, you sit down in front of your computer and you hammer out some sentences, because there's no trick. And that's the catch. I think when you're starting out, you're convinced there is a trick. If somebody would tell you what the trick is, the right process or the right agent or the right publisher, if you just give me this email address, they will hook me up. And the truth is, it is a messy, doubt-inspiring process. with plenty of ups and plenty of downs, and all you can do is sit down in front of your computer, type out some lines, and then you look at those same lines the next day, and maybe you look at the first 20, maybe you look at your first page and you're like, oh my Lord, this is terrible. And then you get to line 21 and you're like, that wasn't bad. Line 21 is pretty good. And now I've got another sentence down, and that paragraph is pretty decent. And then you go back to this page and you go, okay, I'm going to redo all this stuff that didn't work. And I'm going to hold on to these little bits and pieces. And that is how writing works, not the fever fit in the middle of the night where you hammer out 20 pages and they're all perfect, which I swear, I don't know anyone who's ever done. But that day in, day out of sort of mining through your previous day to find the bits that you want to keep, to saving them, to working a little harder, and eventually getting someplace decent. So yeah, sit down and write. Don't worry about the rest. Just get something on the paper. It's kind of a miracle that hasn't happened before.
So to close us out, I was hoping you could read an excerpt from The Well and the Mind for us, because as I said, I'm kind of fangirling. I love that book. So can you read some of it for us?
Sure, I would love to. I think I will start with, I'll do just the way the book begins, since you've done a nice summary of how it starts with Tess, a young girl who lives in Walker County, Alabama. And this is Tess as she is sitting out on her back porch midnight. After she threw the baby in, nobody believed me for the longest time, but I kept hearing that splash. The back porch comes right off our kitchen with wide gray-brown boards you can lose a penny between if you're not careful. The boards were warm with heat from the August air, but breathing was less trouble than it was during daytime. Everybody else was on the front porch after supper, so I could sit by myself, nothing but night and trees around me, a thin moon punched out of the sky. The garden smelled stronger than the leftover fried cornbread and field peas with onions. And the breeze tiptoed across the porch, carrying those smells of meals done and still to come, along with a whiff of Papa's cigarette and snatches of talk from out front. It was the best time of the day to sit with the well, its wooden box taking up one corner of the porch and me taking up another. I loved the well then. I leaned against the kitchen door and looked through the wood posts of the railing, even though I couldn't see anything but black. There weren't clouds covering that slice of moon or the blinking stars. But they still didn't throw enough light. The light from the kitchen door let me see to the edge of the porch. But the woman, she didn't see me, I guess. Sometimes the Hudsons down below got their drinking water here. They didn't have their own well. And I thought it was Miss Hudson at first. But she was like a bird, and this is a big, solid woman with shoulders like a man. She climbed the stairs 2 at a time. Then she hefted that heavy cover off the well like a man would. No trouble. I couldn't see the baby at first because it was underneath her coat, but she took it out, a still little bean-shaped bundle, wrapped up like it was January. I could have reached her in 5 or 6 steps if I'd moved. She held the bundle like a baby for a minute, tucked under her chin like she was patting it to sleep, whispering. The blanket fell back from its head, and I saw a flash of skin. Then she tossed it in, just like that. Not long after the splash, just a quiet, small sound, she lifted the square cover again and fit it back into its cutout space with careful little touches. Even with all that weight, the porch boards didn't creak when she left. I felt my teeth dig into my bottom lip, maybe drawing blood, but I was quiet as a mouse and stiller than one. Mice scatter like marbles. The end.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for chatting with me today. I really appreciate it. I love everything you had to say about Southern writing, about the writing process. And I think that our viewers are really going to appreciate everything you had to say too.
Thanks, Javacia. No, this was fun. Plus, it's like all by myself here. It's just like getting together with a friend and having some coffee.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to join us next time, and we'll be talking to another Southern woman writer.